Hello and welcome to another of PAVE's weekly virtual panel discussions. My name is Ed Niedermeyer. I'm the Communications Director here at Partners for Automated Vehicle Education. And thank you for taking the time today to join us. We have another conversation today in this month's theme of looking at autonomous vehicles and urbanism sort of broadly. And today we're specifically looking at one of the really interesting potential use cases for driving automation technology, which is so often dominated by, sort of the car and people's sort of associations with the car. But public transit is today's topic. And I think there's a lot of really interesting new dimensions to the technology and how it might be used that can really be come out in conversations about this use case. So I think that's especially true when you have such a fantastic group of experts as we have to explore this issue with us today. First off, from the director of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority, Tim Haile is here. Tim, welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, and from Via Transportation, we have autonomous mobility lead, Meghan Grela. Meghan, welcome.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you for having us.
And returning for, I believe, his third PAVE virtual panel, we have from the Center for Transportation and the Environment, autonomous vehicle specialist, Nathaniel Horadam. Nathaniel, welcome back.
Thanks, Ed. Great to be here again.
Yeah, so I want to start by kind of getting each of your perspectives on sort of, kind of the fundamental question that we're going to be exploring today, which is sort of why are transit agencies interested in driving automation technology? Sort of, I guess, whether that's, specific pain points that they want to address in the status quo that the technology might be able to address, or maybe, I don't know, new capabilities. I can speculate, but let's hear from you. And I'd like to start with Tim. Since you're sort of closest to the agency level in some ways, what's your take on that question?
Yeah, thanks, Ed. I really appreciate it. I didn't know Nathaniel was a veteran for PAVE, so I'm kind of like, a little nervous about this. So, relative to, well, first a little bit about Contra Costa Transportation Authority. So we are located here in San Francisco Bay Area in California, and we're in the East Bay. So we're more part of the suburban area of the Bay Area. And Contra Costa Transportation Authority, we, something unique in California is these counties, we call them self-help counties, and we collect a voter-approved half-cent sales tax for transportation programs and projects in Contra Costa County. One of the other things I think unique about Contra Costa Transportation Authority is we actually manage one of the largest secure autonomous vehicle test beds called Momentum Station at the former Concord Naval Weapons Station in the city of Concord. And through that work, we're able to really test a lot of these new emerging technologies and automation that we are really looking to implement here in Contra Costa County and really throughout, really to help and support the world and nation. So I think from an automation standpoint, we've been really interested in the first and last mile concept. And because we are a suburban county, we do have high capacity transit, but in order to get to, Bay Area Rapid Transit BART, in order to get to BART, people have to drive, and, parking lots are filling up by, this is obviously pre-pandemic, but, 6 a.m., 6:30 a.m., and so, and, now with, with the pandemic, it's obviously caused a real cultural shift in terms of really getting people and essential workers. First and last mile is even becoming more important because, they're not necessarily trying to get to BART, but they're trying to get to the grocery store or to, to the hospital for appointments and so forth. And so really, we're really focused on, we were one of the first agencies in California to test a level 4 shared autonomous vehicle on public roads. We just were a recent recipient of the automated driving system grant. And we're actually really focused on how to apply these automation technologies to help support people get to the hospital for medical appointments, but also really help the growing aging population. And so by year 2035, our growing aging population in Contra Costa is going to double. And so it's going to be important to really address that those communities and that demographic as we're kind of looking toward automation and getting people from their home through a network of shared mobility hubs, getting people from their home to transit. and better support transit recovery as we kind of look towards the future.
Yeah, and Meghan, you're the autonomous lead at VIA, and I think VIA is a fascinating company because you are working with cutting edge autonomous driving technology and sort of looking at driving automation in this space. But VIA also operates traditional transit as well, and so I'm wondering if there's something in the experience of traditional transit operation that's informing sort of your approach to driving automation, but also just generally interested in your sort of overall answer to this question of where people are seeing the opportunity in this technology.
Definitely. So yes, VIA is a transit tech company. So that means we build software to help transform mobilities for cities, public transit agencies, transit operators, with the goal of expanding access to mobility that's efficient, affordable, sustainable. And as it relates to autonomous mobility, we're looking to deploy autonomous mobility for those same partners, but do so in a way where it's useful, where it's accessible, where it's sustainable. And so I was particularly excited to hear what Tim had to say to this question as well. I think from what we hear from our transit partners around the world, aside from the general benefits of AVs, mainly reducing accidents caused by human error, transit agencies want to innovate, and AVs are a powerful way to do so, as well as bring additional people to the mass rider community. Innovation can be a hook to get people to try it out. And then when that experience is positive, when it's convenient, it's safe, it can actually get people to stick with it and continue to use it going forward. We also have seen that when deployed properly, when done with appropriate service design, AVs can actually help form more robust transit networks. So Tim referenced like the first mile, last mile problem. I think it's a great use case of when AVs can truly be useful and fill a current transportation gap. And then I think I would just end with there's also significant public funding coming down for AVs. And so we've seen that our public transit partners are looking to tap into this and leverage it.
Yeah, and Nathaniel, I know you've worked on a bunch of different projects. You've been here before and talked about some of them. Very curious about your unique perspective on this.
Yeah, so at CTE, we're primarily focused on medium and heavy duty vehicles, all zero emission. And so that means my experience in the transit automation space has been focused primarily on fixed route, 30 to 40 to 60 foot buses. And so I think you could probably bucket the rationale or where the agency interest is into three buckets. One, operation savings. A lot of that is, concerns about, operators and being able to staff sufficient levels at this point, but also just the large amount of the overall operations cost that comes from driver labor. I think that's been a bit of a misguided approach. And I think a lot of folks are backing off of that at this point for good reason, but also reduce liability, streamlined operations in a lot of other ways, both on-road and off-road. Number two would be capital savings. And that's primarily focused on yard automation in terms of reduced space requirements or possibly even automated charging cycles. And then kind of three would be new and flashy. It's important to innovate. I think a lot of the early experiments were driven kind of by, we want an AV because it's economic development. And if we have an AV, people will think highly of us. But, there is a value to showing that fixed route transit can innovate, can adopt technologies alongside, light vehicles as well. It's not just ride hailing or ride sharing or microtransit that are adopting, but also big buses are able to do this and remain competitive. And as we make big capital planning decisions, bus rapid transit versus light rail, it's kind of important to show that that the bus can be a superior product and competitive at lower cost.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is fascinating because we've already had sort of Tim and Meghan have talked a lot about sort of last mile and kind of microtransit and stuff. Nathaniel's talking about sort of more, fixed route, big buses. Let's help people maybe understand sort of these different use cases and sort of what the opportunities and maybe also the challenges there are as well. I think it's really helpful for people when they're learning about this technology to understand how important, those use cases are from a technology perspective, right? Like the operating domain. but also just understanding, where are the opportunities to make this, something that can really valuably contribute. So, Meghan, do you want to start with sort of tackling the microtransit side of this and what that means and sort of why there's opportunity or maybe need there?
Sure. So microtransit is a nice buzzword, but what it means is it's tech-enabled shared transportation. And in my mind, it has similarities to both ride-hailing technology that we typically think of, as well as the buses that Nathaniel mentioned. So in terms of ride-hailing technology, it's similar to what we experience today. Riders can be anywhere where the service is, say open up their rider app and book a ride on demand within a few clicks, selecting a pickup zone, a drop-off zone, and then booking their ride. And then similarly, when they get in the vehicle itself is routed based on real-time factors like additional rider demand coming in through other requests, real-time traffic conditions. It's also similar to traditional fixed route buses in the sense that it's shared. So we're pooling riders, we're optimizing for mass mobility. And it also leverages what we call virtual bus stops. So oftentimes it's not the specific pickup or drop off point. It's very close, but it's optimizing for areas where people can walk a few steps, but it helps avoid detours and enables a constant stream of people going in and out of these vehicles. I think microtransit serves a unique space. It can be oftentimes complementary to existing fixed route transit, and it helps expand transit networks in ways when times other solutions can't necessarily, and do so often for populations that are usually out of reach.
Tim, you want to?
Maybe Ed, if I could just chime in here, I think one example of this is we're working on a project, we call it dynamic personal microtransit. And, I think one benefit of automation is the ability to extend transit into places where potentially transit just cannot go, whether it's, cost prohibited or, et cetera. And so I think we tend to think of these shared autonomous vehicles kind of ride hailing and kind of operating within, mixed traffic. And so we're actually looking at ways to develop a system of this dynamic personal microtransit. And we're working with a company called Glideways, and it's a small little pod. It's only 5 feet wide and about 7 feet long. It holds about 4 people. You do not share this vehicle with someone. It is your own personal ride. And by creating it in a fixed, dedicated path, so this is its own space that really provides a lot of efficiencies. You're not having to really rely on going through traffic signals and et cetera and dealing with congestion. And so by designing this in a mesh network, we put together essentially a $450 million project in East Contra Costa County to better serve those communities and better serve existing fixed route transit in those communities. And we're going through a P3 effort right now as for that project. And I think the whole intention is, we could think about BRT and extending transit BRT, but the fact that these vehicles are smaller, I think that helps down on the capital cost, the operational cost, et cetera. And then I think that I just saw a question here in the chat. I don't know if you want to address that now or later, Ed, but I think that's a project that we're really focused on in terms of, by making the vehicle smaller, it really helps reduce the cost. And then in terms of, like, to Nathaniel's point, in terms of operating the fleet, if you operate the fleet in a way that's based on demand responsiveness, in terms of a mesh network, if this system is designed correctly, and we'll obviously validate it through some of the work we're doing, but it'll operate like 10,000 riders per hour. So we're talking about light rail status, but a much smaller vehicle, the cost is lower, and using automation in that way to help again extend transit and get access to transit that you normally wouldn't have today.
Yeah, no, and I think if you think about the ride hailing ability, the software platform's ability to match supply and demand like really, really efficiently. And when you are working with capital intensive assets like transit agencies are, obviously you want to maximize your your utilization of them. And so I think there's some really interesting potential there. Nathaniel, I would love to get your take on sort of microtransit as an opportunity here, and then maybe if you could use that to lead into some of the other applications that you referenced.
So when we talk about the value proposition here, and even the challenge of getting to a quote unquote level 4 vehicle at scale, and I'll also point out in the Connecticut DOT project that I'm currently supporting with the CT Fast Track automated BRT, we've kind of dropped mention of the SAE levels of automation. We've found when it gets to contracting, functional design, it actually kind of breaks down a lot in terms of being a useful framework. But if we think about what it would take to produce a truly driverless or personnel-less vehicle, I do think that the comment in here from Cormac McKay is well taken. Onboard passenger security becomes a challenge, and so it's where I'm a little more skeptical about the ability to quote unquote right size transit down the road and see the need for vehicles where the economics still support having a person on board. And once you're paying someone $15+ an hour to be on board at all times and provide that first line of defense or safety for passengers, then it's like, well, what's really the value proposition here in trying to go full bore automation, go to quote unquote level 4, rather than just pay drivers well and try to automate the things that they don't do particularly well, or make their job a little bit easier, make it easier to retain them. So, that's where I am a true believer in the fixed route service and the value proposition for doing this, and do tend to get a little more skeptical about being able to produce something completely on demand or flexible. And moreover, just the immense cost that comes with programming that degree of variability in the operational design domain. When we're dealing with a 9-mile CT Fast Track or any other route that's 5 to 10, maybe 15 miles long, and this is really customized. I mean, this is not Argo AI or Waymo or Uber, or rather getting to do hundreds of millions of dollars worth of development chasing some level of functional performance. We're talking about budgets of $5, $10, $15 million where you can't guarantee you're going to reach that level of performance. And so being able to constrain it geographically and produce just a high quality product on that fixed route makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're curious to learn more about the project that Nathaniel's talking about, and we go a little bit more into that bus rapid transit use case in past ones, you can go to our YouTube library and watch the past panel there, because I think that BRT concept is interesting because you do have a lane that's already dedicated to something, so you already have kind of some operational design domain advantages that help limit those challenges, but which makes, I think, your point here all the more interesting. But since we sort of broached, and thanks to the audience member who broached a topic we were going to get to, but I think this is the perfect time to do it, is this sort of question of that's on a lot of people's minds, which is sort of what is the role of people in public transit? And I think one of the interesting points is that I think bus drivers are almost the canonical example of a driver who does quite a bit more than just drive. And again, I think this probably also varies from use case to use case, right? And from place to place probably as well. So I'd like to get a variety of perspectives on this if possible. Tim, would you like to start?
Yeah, absolutely. Relative to the shared autonomous vehicle, I agree with you. We've done a lot of polling and surveying around automation and technology and so forth. And, security is a common question, in terms of their, the desire to use a vehicle. And I think, this is going to really require a lot of education, but, and as well as transition. So, in terms of, we've got a shared autonomous vehicle project that we're looking at in a retirement community, a senior community of Rossmore. And as part of that work, we're planning on having some sort of an attendant, in the vehicle to really address that security issue. And I think that's just the fact of the matter, and until we actually get to that level of comfort, that there wouldn't be an attendant or someone in the vehicle. I think that, I think the other aspect of that is, we are trying to figure out, and working with our partners to, how do we put in technology in these vehicles to help making sure that they could be safe, you know, in terms of, you know, real-time remote monitoring, you know, inside the vehicle with cameras, etc. Validation, making sure that you are, you know, based on the on-demand ride-hailing aspects of it. And I'm sure Meghan can probably talk about this, is you know, making sure that you're validated and you're supposed to be in this vehicle, right? And so making sure that you're being validated, and that happens both with, you know, that's why I think the dynamic personal microtransit is also a very interesting option, is because you're not sharing the vehicle with someone. You know, it's small enough to where it's your vehicle, you ride in it either by yourself or your closest 3 friends. You know, and that's why I think it's also another nice transition in terms of how, and I think closed systems is also another way to maybe address security as well. You know, in terms of having this vehicle operate within mixed traffic, etc. So I think having a closed system also provides benefit, but I think we're definitely in this transition in terms of education of how to, you know, really, one, trust the technology, number one, and then also address the security issues.
Yeah, Meghan, I'd like to get your perspective on this as well, just because, again, I just think it's on so many people's minds. Are there some cases where maybe people will be, you know, not in those vehicles anymore, and some where there will be? Like, what are some of those differences, or just kind of what's your perspective on this question of security and the future of humans in transit?
Yeah, appreciate this question and thoughtfulness of the discussion. I think first, microtransit as it relates to AVs, if we agree that the objective is to provide useful, inclusive, sustainable, autonomous transportation, I think microtransit does have core capabilities that help to achieve those objectives. So one is the ability to be part of an integrated mixed fleet. And I think this is directly related to what you just asked. When deployed as such, so part of a non-autonomous, autonomous mixed fleet and integrated with public transit, AVs can actually help create an even more robust network. So they're only available where they serve a distinct purpose and not pushed into areas like certain topographies or road conditions where the tech might not yet be ready to serve today. And regular vehicles, while maybe a little less exciting, they can serve a purpose by providing supply for rider demand when and where AVs can't go. So from a public transit agency perspective, and would love Tim's opinion here as well, this enables AVs to solve real needs and not just be deployed for innovation's sake. And to the earlier points about the purpose of on-demand dynamic routing, when AVs are deployed in such a way, and Ed, you mentioned this, we can optimize utilization. So we're filling as many seats as possible for as many trips as possible. But like Tim said, also need to think about how to maintain a high quality service. And so we'll balance those 2 parameters. And so this utilization helps operators maximize cost efficiency for relatively expensive, at least currently, AV assets. And then I think finally is the importance of a tech-enabled rider experience. Tim just mentioned the importance of like education and inculcating trust. And so how can we leverage technology to make that transition as seamless as possible, particularly for those who may have never stepped in an AV before? So things like a rider app that can have live vehicle tracking or live customer support, or once a rider gets in the vehicle, there's an in-vehicle screen with live trip updates. Things like that can make the rider experience accessible, friendly, etc., so that when people, going back to my earlier point, when people try it out potentially just for innovation's sake, they actually find it a very positive experience, then continue to use mass transit, public transit, and even AVs going forward.
Yeah, so I love the variety of perspectives here, and I think it really captures the fact that there's still so much to learn about sort of where to, get the most advantages out of this technology, and folks are continuing to pilot this all around the country. So as we wrap up this discussion, I'd kind of like to get each of you to share maybe what's sort of one of the most important things you've learned, through this sort of early stages of experimenting and understanding and deploying this technology. And maybe any advice that you would give to transit agencies or others who are interested in exploring driving automation in their public transit system. Tim, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing this now since I think 2014, 2015, and I would say that in terms of automation, that we still have a lot to learn. I mean, we see this stuff on a daily basis. the technology, it's got a ways to go, right? And I think that relative to this space, I mean, in terms of, just automation in general, but also, relative to these more purpose design driven type vehicles, like a shared autonomous vehicle, I think there's still some volatility in terms of, because you're dealing with startups and the marketplace and et cetera. And like, for example, we were working with the Local Motors Ollie 2.0 shuttle, and they closed their doors out of nowhere, and now we're kind of left in a gap in one of our grants. And so as we see this stuff actually happening in real time, this stuff is not easy. It takes a lot in terms of testing and technology and advancing that technology. I think that I know we didn't really get into it, but in terms of early deployments and early key wins, I think that we're really focused on ADAS systems, automated driving assist systems, and really leveraging that with connected vehicles. We're looking at a bus on shoulder project right now on the 680 corridor, and how can we leverage ADAS systems on that to really make that really appealing to the public and make it safe. And so I think as we kind of look, and that's also, like I said, we're focused on more of these closed systems, because having a vehicle in a closed system provides probably more opportunity to be safe, rather than being in mixed traffic, right? And so I think we got a long ways to go, and there's going to be a transition over time. And I think that one thing that we've learned through all of this is that you need to be flexible in terms of, if you're really going to really test these and use these technologies, I think you got to be really flexible in terms of working with the private sector. But I would also say, we spent a lot of time, on regulation reform with both our state and federal government. And so I think relative to exemptions for the federal vehicle motor standards, and, dealing with Buy America, and a lot of these things are real challenges as part of these projects and dealing with private sector. And so those are some of the things that we've learned, going through this process and working on several grants.
Yeah, Nathaniel, I'd like to get your sort of learnings and advice here, because Tim did just mention a couple of things that you've talked about, different levels of automation, looking at sort of the opportunities with purpose-built automation. So go ahead.
Yeah, and I agree with a lot of that. I will just say, if I could do two takeaways here. One, there's no substitute for good land use. Densify, make it easier to run fixed route, high capacity transit. It is the best use case for automated driving systems. And it's only when we have to default to lower density sprawl that we need to start talking about more flexible solutions. Two, don't necessarily chase level 4, quote unquote, level 4 automation. Assume the driver is going to be in the loop for a very, very long time, a decade or more, and start to think about capabilities that make the most sense to integrate iteratively or progressively in an evolution. And we're going to be in pilot phase for, I think, quite some time. I don't think it makes sense to manufacture these things at scale or try to pigeonhole, an industry and to like big specifications. It's going to be very highly contextualized within an ODD or an operational design domain, geared towards specific routes. I mean, it's not just agency to agency, it is route to route, where we have to think about individual use cases, functionality that makes sense to program within constrained budgets. And so thinking about these things iteratively makes a lot more sense. And I think I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and I share the frustration Tim sort of expressed earlier. With more time, I would have loved to have gotten into some of the non-obvious stuff that I know you work on, Nathaniel, like and mentioned like the yard automation piece of it, right? Which people always just think of the automation on the bus as they might be riding it, but there are other opportunities as well. Relationship with electrification. There's just so much going on in transit right now, and unfortunately we have limited time. Meghan, you get the last word here. What are your sort of lessons learned and maybe advice for others who want to go down this explore this world?
Sure, be quick. I think the importance of intentionally designing a service, which both Tim and Nathaniel alluded to. We have AV services level 3 deployed around the entire world today on behalf of our public transit partners, and they're serving real useful purposes today. but they look different, right? We have robo-taxis in hot central Texas that are integrated into an existing transit system. We had a robo shuttle in a senior citizen community in Australia. Those looked very different. But the point is, when we roll back up and we understand what are our service objectives, what are we trying to achieve, and for whom. I think one thing today we didn't discuss is accessibility. Who are our riders? How can we make sure everyone is included in this future? And when we plan it in that way, services achieve usability, accessibility, and sustainability.
Absolutely. Well, this has been just a really fascinating conversation. I really want to thank all three of our panelists today for making the time to be here and sharing their deep experience with this really, really interesting area of driving automation technology. Tim Haile, Executive Director from the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. Tim, thanks so much for being here. Nathaniel Horadam.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Nathaniel Horadam, Managing Consultant, Autonomous Vehicle Specialist at Center for Transportation and the Environment. Nathaniel, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great to do this again.
And Meghan Grela is the Autonomous Mobility Lead at Via Transportation. Meghan, thank you so much for sharing your perspective today.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you, Tim and Nathaniel, as well.
And thank you, of course, to our audience for once again making the important choice of making driving automated vehicle education a part of your day. We know your lives are very busy, and we really, really do appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today and to learn really along with us about some of the interesting things that are happening in this space and some of the lessons that we can take away from it. If you would like to share this conversation with others, it will be up on our YouTube account shortly. We will also be tweeting clips and quotes from it via our social media accounts, which you can find on almost all social media platforms at pavecampaign.org. Also, this will be released as an episode of the PAVEcast, which is a relatively new initiative that we have. In addition to these weekly virtual panel discussion recordings, you can also find conversations that we have specifically for that. And I really encourage you, if you find these conversations useful and interesting, go ahead and look for the PAVEcast on any podcasting platform. And subscribe so that you can stay connected with some of the exclusive stuff we do just for that. And with that, thank you all again for making this yet another wonderful weekly virtual panel. And we will see you here again next week.